So of course, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Hence, any assertion that matter came from something inanimate requires extraordinary evidence.
No, I disagree. I'm going to be consistent. You're inconsistent. I say no. Evidence is evidence. And if the evidence is that God exists, I'm going to follow the evidence. I don't need extraordinary evidence. That's where we disagree.
But why?
Why? Because you're being inconsistent.
No. Why do you not require extraordinary evidence? I mean, this is like religion aside. Like, if I'm going to claim that I'm the most amazing person in the world, I want evidence for that.
And as a consistent thinker, I'm going to demand evidence before I believe anything, but I'm not going to demand extraordinary evidence. I'm going to be consistent and demand evidence.
But it's proportional to the claim. I can say I'm the most amazing person in the world and then show I got a B+ in an essay. Like, that is evidence. It's decent, but it's not amazing. Or I could say I got 1 A+ once. That's still proportional to the evidence in the claim. It has to.
What's enough evidence?
I'm going to follow you around. And if you tell me you're an outstanding person, all I got to do is follow you around for a week, and I'll be able to tell whether you're an outstanding person or not. I'll have more than enough evidence that you really are incredible, or that, no, you're very normal.
Okay, that was just an example. I'm a pretty shitty guy. But no, yeah. But I still don't quite see, case in point, and if I don't ignore me, use any other example, I don't quite see how
I disagree with changing the goalposts when it comes to evidence. I am not going to say, Muhammad, in order for me to trust you, when you say that you reveal God accurately, you have to give me some extraordinary evidence. No, I'm just going to look at his life, his teachings, his death, what happened after his death. I'm going to do the same thing with Siddhartha Gautama Buddha. I'm going to do the same thing with the avatars of Hinduism, and I'm going to do the same thing with Jesus Christ.
But there's a lot more room for error there. You're comparing, say, a historical document to me pointing at a seed and saying extraordinarily that this seed is going to grow into a tree. Now, that claim, with no context, requires extraordinary evidence. I have no idea if that seed is going to become a tree. What do I need? I need 1,000 trees, 1,000 seeds that can demonstrate without any doubt that seed will become a tree. You can't then compare that to a historical document with all the problems that's associated with. That's not a fair comparison, if I may.
The reason I think you're being inconsistent is because you've had a delight. I've enjoyed your dialogue with you.
Likewise.
Okay? So I thank you for the way you've talked with me so respectfully, and it's been a delight. Do I have a lot of evidence that you're a great guy? No. No. I can't live my life as a hyper-skeptic. It doesn't work. If I have this changing goalposts of, oh gosh, for him I got to need more evidence, for him less evidence, for her more evidence, no, that doesn't work. I got to be consistent and say, all right, if you give me enough evidence that you're respectful and that you're treating me with some kind of dignity, although I don't know you, I'm going to trust you a little bit. And as we go on in our relationship, I'll trust you more and more. And that's the way I'll treat everybody.
So extraordinary evidence, I'll give you just a little bit more. Out of Duke, there are large studies coming out. Dr. Bruce is kind of the expert out of Duke on NDE, near-death experiences. Over 300 peer-reviewed articles in scientific and psychological journals have corroborated on near-death experiences having occurred, such as one man had an experience where he was outside of his body. Typically, this is how it goes, right? Outside of his body, and he knew what was going on down the hall. The nurses corroborated with that evidence and said, yes, that did occur. He actually read the numbers off of a sheet of paper and knew what was going on in that room. So 300 peer-reviewed in scientific and psychological journals. Then there was another huge study done across Europe, India, and the US. 30 million, at least, people stated that they have had NDEs, near-death experiences themselves. I never would have talked about NDEs last year, the year before that. I thought it was a total joke. I think the science and this extraordinary evidence is so strong now that we at least have to dip our toes into it. I also went over to Haiti after the earthquake in 2010. I definitely saw some miraculous experiences and what was going on spiritually. My brother has spent time in Africa. He has noticed some of the supernatural experiences going on down there. So I think you and I in the West, we need to get out a little bit more, out of our little microcosm, out of our little bubble. And it's hard to do so because we're stuck so much in our materialism and technology and scientific mindset. But when we do get out, then some of the evidence does become more apparent.
if I may, I only brought up extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence in the context of this specific scenario whereby if enough evidence was showing that inanimate matter could become animate matter, you asked me what my requirements would be, or what your requirements would be to accept that. And I merely replied that would require extraordinary evidence. So that was how we initiated this conversation, because I think you disagree, think it just requires evidence.
What's extraordinary evidence within that context? Because it sounds like a vacuum to me.
Sure. So in the same context of evolution, I mean that is quite the claim to suggest that we came from a few cells in the water. I mean that is a colossal claim, and yet the fossil record has shown, without a doubt, the correlation between species and the development with the planet. So that is an enormous record, which hasn't built up any exceptions to that theory. So that's the sort of obviously scale of evidence that would be required in the equivalent context of inanimate matter becoming animate matter. That's what I'm suggesting.
Jesus being raised from the dead? Is that what you're talking about? What's the reference to the documentation?
No, the fossil record.
Yeah, the fossil record. But I'm still. Are you catching the point? I'm missing the point on the supernatural evidence that he needs when it comes to early manuscripts, or I'm not following that point.
I'm not talking about manuscripts or.
What's the supernatural evidence that you need?
I didn't say supernatural. I said extraordinary evidence.
Extraordinary evidence that you need, because no, I know atheists make this point. Matt Dillahunty and others talk about extraordinary evidence.
Can I also point out that
that's why I brought
at
it
no point
into
have I said I am an atheist.
Okay. No, but I'm just saying atheists make this very point you're making. But you're applying it very specifically. I've never heard it done this way. To what exactly?
So the context of the conversation we're having before was about why we accept, or why you would accept evolution to explain how God developed life on this planet, and that you would turn to science to explain that, but you turn to religion to explain its origin and its conception, and as a result you can't possibly accept that we came from some slime. That's the position you've posited. So my argument is, or my suggestion, or my question is, if evidence did suggest, overwhelming evidence did suggest, that we did indeed come from not just slime but a bit of rock. I don't know how it'd work, I'm not a scientist. To a degree that actually rivaled the fossil record, which is how you justify and explain evolution, would you then have to accept that? And what would be the ramifications for your theological positions?
It's very, very simple. I do not think the fossil record is complete in showing that we come from a single-cell organism. If you're out here arguing that the fossil record is so conclusive that we come from a single-cell organism, I would strongly disagree. There are so many gaps in the fossil record, it's incredible. Now, if those gaps are filled, then sure, I'll believe that we came from a single-cell organism. But that still doesn't answer the question, is there an intelligent mind behind it or not?
That's a different question.
That's a philosophical question, which is different.
You said only a few moments ago that you turn to evolution to understand the way in which God has worked, and yet at the same time you're now questioning the very evidence that underpins that scientific consensus. So I don't understand which position you hold. Do you either...
Real simple. I accept evolution as a process, not as an origin.
Oh, sure, but how can you accept evolution as a process if you've just identified that, in your view, the fossil record is insufficient?
Because microevolution can be shown to be true in a lab and on a breeding farm.
Sorry, what's macroevolution?
Microevolution is within species. Macroevolution is crossing special lines. I see very little evidence that I can breed a horse to the point where it becomes a pig. Can't do it. But there's a lot of evidence that Darwin showed that by breeding carefully, you can turn an ugly pigeon into a finely feathered pigeon. So I accept microevolution. It can be shown.
If I may, that's just false information. As in, there is a huge amount of evidence demonstrating the link to the dinosaurs, and you can trace the genealogy very clearly. Like, that is not something that has gaps. And I don't quite understand.
Yes, there are gaps. You can't show a consistent progression in fossil record from single-cell organism to you today. That does not exist, sir.
Well, mainly because single cells don't have fossils. But I mean, beyond that, the record that is there is overwhelming.
No, it's not.
I mean, okay, I don't want to go into a discussion about evolution because I kind of thought we'd already dealt with this problem.
Yeah, there's no creative mechanism. The second point is there's no creative mechanism in evolution. That's why evolution as an origin is a fantasy, because there is no creative mechanism in evolution.
Evolution doesn't explain the origin. It never claims to.
Oh, it has no creative mechanism.
Sure, but like that's...
It has lots of adaptation, but it has no creative mechanism.
But it never claims to.
Oh, there are many evolutionists that claim
But even
that
the word
creative.
evolution requires something to move from A to B. It doesn't explain A. I mean, I don't quite understand what you're suggesting here. Evolution, by definition, requires transition. It doesn't quite explain a point of creation. Evolution never purports to explain creation.
Richard Dawkins and many Americans who hold to evolution insist that evolution explains everything in terms of life. And there is no evidence that anybody can show me that there's a creative mechanism in evolution. It does not exist.
I refuse to accept that anyone argues realistically that evolution explains creation, mainly because, as I just pointed out, it literally makes no sense. Evolution is an evolutionary process.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, okay, but that's not what I'm arguing here. I'm not claiming evolution explains creation. The hypothetical question that I've been repeating is, if a theory had enough evidence as evolution to substantiate a transition from inanimate to animate matter, what ramifications would that have for your theological positions? And
It wouldn't have any for me. None.
You a second ago said that if life was proved to come from slime or from whatever, from an inanimate object, you wouldn't be able to accept that. But what if it did? How would your positions change? Or how would you adapt if they don't?
I have answered you so many times, it's incredible, sir.
You keep turning to evolution as a creative process, and I'm never claiming
If
it
it
is.
renders God excessive and expendable, then it would shatter. I already answered that, right?
Yeah,
Are you waiting for him to answer that?
But I suppose because we essentially blended conversations here, so I sort of wondered where
Yeah, well, we've answered it so many different angles.
He's
it's
answered
incredible.
it, so I'm wondering how you're going to answer.
And I did before that. I told you it would not change God's existence for me, because still it's a philosophical question of when the inanimate matter became animate, was there an intelligent mind, a living being behind that or not? And I told you that all of my observation is that life comes from life. It never comes from non-life.
So if it was proved that it came from non-life.
But how do you prove that? How do you prove scientifically that there is no intelligent mind behind the process? Sir, you see, that's not a scientific question. You cannot prove that scientifically. The same way I cannot scientifically prove that God exists, nobody can scientifically prove that God does not exist. Why? Because the question of God is not a scientific question.
These same questions that
You're in the
asking
wrong
now,
class.
These same questions you're asking now about how on earth I could prove that inanimate matter turned into matter and that explain the point of origin are exactly the same sort of questions that Christians gave to scientists who were looking into evolution as an explanatory process. I don't have the answers to that, but nor did they until they came across the fossil record. So I'm leaving room for the unknown here, but by the same token, you can't rule it out.
I never have.
You have.
I have never ruled out that scientists are going to be able to show how inanimate matter can become animate. Okay, I've never ruled that out. What I have said is, ultimately, I don't believe that life comes from non-life. I believe that life comes from life.
Okay, and if it...
That's a philosophical point. That's not a scientific point.
Like what you're making it a philosophical point. What I'm suggesting is if it moved from a philosophical point to a scientific one, how would you adapt to that? That's what I'm wondering. By the same token, evolution was considered, as in how the creative process manifested, was also initially considered a philosophical point. And then it became a scientific one when the evidence built up.
Okay.
So that's why...
I've answered you as best as I can, and here's my conclusion. If you tell me that 2 + 2 = 4 is a personal statement about relationships, I am forever going to disagree with you.
With respect, you opened with these questions, and I'd rather you answer the question rather.
Yeah, I am. I am answering you head up now. I'm telling you that if you show me that 2 + 2 = 4 is a personal relational issue, I'm going to disagree with you to my grave. I am convinced that 2 + 2 = 4 is a mathematical statement. It is not a statement about relationships. And obviously that's one of the things I've been pleading with you guys. Learn to distinguish between different forms of knowledge. I do not scientifically prove God exists. It's impossible. But the evidence of order and design, of a moral absolute, of the existence of love and meaning in life, points to the existence of God. That is not science. That is not math. That is philosophy. Now, if I have a kidney that is failing, I want the best scientist, the best doctor to take care of my failing kidney. That is not a relational issue. That is a physical, biological, medical issue. You've got to learn to distinguish between different areas of knowledge.
With respect, you're setting the different parameters of knowledge on your own, and those parameters have shifted and do shift. So my point is, a question that may initially have been philosophical becomes scientific. Nothing's fixed here. So by
I
bringing up
disagree.
but that's not a point of
I
opinion.
I will never accept the idea that 2 + 2 = 4 is a relational statement. It's a mathematical statement, not a relational statement.
Evolution used to be a relational statement until it became one of scientific nature. My point is, parameters do change.
But
This isn't an opinion.
I think you're buying into scientism as a catch-all, and that supersedes history, the humanities, and everything else, which is what we see in this country today. I think it sounds like you're talking about science just exists in a vacuum. No, science doesn't exist. There's not such thing as science. There's only scientists. There's only scientists in terms of who come up with theories. Well, you keep talking, it sounds to me like you keep referencing to science as some ironclad study that proves everything.
Absolutely not.
It certainly doesn't. Well, you just talked about his point of view, and how his point of view is supposedly an ironclad point of view that's just covering over everything. It just sounds to me like that's what how you're referencing science, right?
The reason why is because I can't think of a single example where something that has shifted from a philosophical thing, a form of knowledge, to a mathematical one has then shifted back to philosophical. That's never ever happened. It's a one-way process. So that's not me thinking science is ironclad.
So?
But that's just.
All right, well, what do you think about Jesus Christ?
I don't want to go into. You already covered this area.
All right, good. We had a good time talking. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Can I
You bet.
ask what answer were you looking for?
Well, I was curious, for example, a hypothetical answer you could have given would be that if evidence did come up that was sufficient to convince the scientific body that inanimate matter did generate animate matter, I was wondering whether or not you then have to regard that bit of rock as the origin of creation, or whatever thing that was, that inanimate object
Not
being
really,
life.
because then we can always argue God is what caused that to go.
Well, hold on. I would say, so that's an emotional and intellectual loaded question, and I like that you're asking it. I would say that, me personally, if it proves that there's no beginning and that we don't need a creator, then intellectually I would have to agree and say that there is no God. But I can ask you the same kind of thing. I would say, if Christianity was true, would you be a Christian?
Yeah, I assume I would. Yeah, I assume I would have to. Sure, but that's a lot. I mean, I don't know what that
You'd
means.
have to. I don't think you would have to. Many people would say no. I ran into many people who would say, even if Christianity is true, I wouldn't be a Christian. And that shows there's emotion behind it, as opposed to it's a matter of intellect in our debate.
But Christianity is an abstract concept, whereas I'm talking about something.
It's not an abstract concept. It's not a philosophical principle. It's based off of history and whether or not the resurrection occurred or not. It's not an abstract concept.
Oh no, it's rooted in history. I'm not disputing the historical validity of.
But that was just my last question.
Of course,
We should
okay.
probably get on.
Of course, sure.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Great questions, great points.
Right, I'm freezing my balls.